Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back talking about Big Brother Canada, where here I will be doing my now traditional mid-season power ranking for BB Can 11. So we are technically at the halfway point of the season. The jury phase has already started somehow. So again, this is typically the time that I would do a video like this, where again, I am going to be running through the remaining players left in the game, ranking them based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game, and then also outside that, talk about the season so far along with its booted players. And this has just been a strange season. I mean, obviously it already started off on a rocky note with the announcement that there weren't going to be feeds, and instead we get these digital dailies, which are not great, with like 80% of the content within them being completely irrelevant, while the remainder gives us really small glimpses into what's actually happening. And it's all a shame considering it does feel like the events of this season so far are very strong. I mean, despite the cast being filled with people that don't really know what they're doing, and this cast as a whole is relatively weak gameplay wise, it does feel like there's a lot of interesting gameplay going on. There's a lot of interesting structures being built, and we're really just not seeing the full picture, which is definitely a shame here. Because it very much feels like this could have been a truly great season, despite the fact that it does also feel like a train wreck at the same time. I mean, we've literally had 2 people leave due to personal reasons, while we had another person leave due to being a sore loser. And it does make this a really strange first half of the season. I mean, again, at this point, 6 people have left the game. However, only 3 of them have been formally voted out. The pre-jury phase only involves 2 actual vote outs. There are more people that left the game unnaturally in the pre-jury than actually got voted out. However, despite that, again, the gameplay of the season is pretty insane. I mean, during those first 2 weeks, it really is Zach seeming to run things, running both HOHs and doing so terribly. However, making these really big moves, and that did lead to interesting TV and what could have been a really boring season at the beginning, where it did seem like the bros were going to bro down and really run the game, and for that to completely fracture by week 2 is just really humorous to see. And for that to all lead to Zach's eventual backdoor, where his and Ty's petulance over Hope's letter is just extremely humorous to see as well, to where I do think that week 3 does go down as an all-time great Big Brother week. Really, that Thursday episode to me is one of the best episodes in BB Can history. And while we had a much slower recent week, it still felt like the foundation of what's to come. Seeing the players finally form power structure that seems somewhat stable in this game. And overall, again, it's been a solid season so far. In a situation where, like, if we had feeds, like, this probably does rival the likes of BB Can's 9 and 10. But due to the lack of feeds, due to the lack of information, due to the lack of online presence, I do feel like the overall excitement for this season is definitely lowered from what it could have been. As you could tell, there's a good season here. It's just that I don't think it's ever going to get the respect that it normally would have. But with that, let's start running through the booted players so far, leading up to the eventual power ranking. So let's start off with Amal, who, again, like, we don't really have much to say about. She left the game very early, didn't even get a DR on this season, which I think is a shame, obviously, considering she is a big super fan. It did feel like she was there to play the game, and I think she would have perfectly fit in with the now current core power structure, which would have been interesting to see. Though really, again, like, she left so early that we didn't really get to see much of her, though she's all over social media and seems like a fun presence there. But again, not much to say about her on this season. Next up, we have JM, John Michael, who I pretty much called exactly how his game was going to play out, which is a shame because obviously I didn't want that to happen. John Michael seemed like a fun presence early on, and for him to essentially be excluded by this bro alliance and instantly targeted by them as this schemy guy is just not fun to watch. Again, we've seen this in the past, the likes of Anetti and Neil, though this happened even earlier, like in literally the first boot. Though really, again, like, I don't feel like John Michael did that much wrong to be the first boot. It really just felt like a situation where people were intimidated by him off the bat. Now, obviously, he could have handled certain situations better. He could have played a bit more aggressively. But really, I do feel like people targeted him due to preconceived notions. And again, it's just really sad to see another one of these, like, big fans being taken out really early. Then we get to Roberto, who, again, really blows my mind that he was the second boot on this season. Again, starting off the season, we had this massive bro alliance that seemed to be completely running things. It seemed like Rob was set up extremely well, having the likes of a Shanaya and a Renee by his side, having Hope and Jonathan as really close allies. Though even at the beginning, there was this tension with Ty, where Ty clearly didn't trust them, despite the fact that Rob trusted him, which was bad. But again, the fact that he ends up being backdoored the following week is insane to me. And again, that's the first moment that there was this glimpse of potential in this season. It really felt like during week 1 that we were just going to get this boring slog of the more likable presences in the house being taken out one by one. And while Rob is certainly more likable than Zach and Ty, I still think seeing this like massive bro being taken out early on was really great to see. Even though, again, feel bad for Rob. Like, I really don't feel like he did that much wrong. Again, there is the passiveness there, though really on most given casts, I feel like he's fine in this position. But with players like Zach and Ty, who decided to turn on their allies for no reason, it led to him being booted early. But really, I do think his boot here did set a precedent for the season that you should be taking these big shots, which has and will probably continue to pay dividends moving forward. Next up, we have Vanessa. And again, like, we don't know what happened with Vanessa. She just left, so not really going to touch on that. But in terms of her impact on the season, it is a very strange one, as she was one that was very rarely on the show. She was very rarely on digital dailies. Like, it really felt like we knew nothing about her until all of a sudden it turns out that she blew up on Zach and blew up the game, even though that didn't really seem to actually play that much of a factor, as really it was just an excuse for Zach and Ty to put Rob on the block when they were already going to. But through that blow up, again, there are semblances of a good character there. It's just that when she's not blowing up, she's just not relevant. And really, I think a lot of that has to do with her gameplay. I think her gameplay is just terrible. I mean, there's really nothing to truly praise from her. She was never solidly aligned with anybody, never had a true alliance, never had solid allies that wanted to bring her forward. She just simply felt like she was there, not looked at as a big enough threat to take out immediately, the one that no one really trusted and no one really wanted to bring far into the game. And while obviously, yeah, there are these difficulties with being the oldest person in the house, I feel like we've seen in the past these times of these older players at least being good socially around the house and people liking them and worming their way into the game, while Vanessa really just didn't even seem to try that much. Sticking to the bottom and then lying about her Rob vote, which made her even more sketchy, and then just straight up not being someone that was long for the game no matter what. So again, I do feel like as a whole, I didn't love her role on this season, though again, it's still a shame to see someone have to walk from the game. Oh, let's move on to Zach, who, wow. I mean, Zach really was all over this season for those first 3 weeks. I mean, he essentially ran the first 2 weeks of the game. Again, he completely manipulated Santina into taking out John Michael. He completely manipulated Dan into taking out Rob in situations where JM wanted to work with Santina, Rob wanted to work with Dan, but also in a situation where JM wanted to work with Zach. And Rob wanted to work with Zach, at least short term. And like the fact that Zach essentially orchestrates the first 2 weeks of the game, but doing so in situations where he is taking out people that wanted to work with him is genuinely insane. Doing so and making himself a big target around the house for almost no real benefit. Like, to me, I feel like Zach is probably the worst player that actually had some sort of control in the game. Again, I'll never take away the amount of agency he had in those first few weeks, but again, he did everything wrong with that agency. He just set himself up to be booted pretty soon afterwards. Now, week 3 was pretty quick, especially considering how that week started, where initially Santina was going to be the target for that week, though after the Vanessa walk and then also Hope's veto win, Koozie does decide to take out Zach. And even from that point, supposedly he came extremely close to staying, where Shanaya was actually on board of keeping him, and Claudia greatly considered it until the very end. Though again, he then quits the game, which I will say the entire events leading up to his quit are just so glorious to watch. Like, to me, this was such a perfect downfall for Zach, where I know a lot of people are upset that how dare Zach quit the game, and like, yeah, it's bad, especially for the reasons he does so, but it made for great TV. I do think it's a great storyline for Zach, this guy who ran things for the first few weeks. At the first time he faces adversity, he's like, screw it, I'm out. And like the entire Hope letter scandal is just so funny, to where it's really nothing. Again, it's literally Hope's girlfriend writing a letter before the season, sticking it into his bag. Again, it's not even a situation where like Hope deliberately brings it in. Though to be fair, I will say I did actually get worried that Hope would get expelled, because that's BB Can for you. Even the eventual punishment felt like a little harsh, especially the no playing in the HOH. But what's funny about all of it too is the fact that Zach essentially gets what he wants. Like, while ideally, yeah, he wanted Hope expelled, but he still got to the point where Hope couldn't vote, meaning that he comes one step closer to staying. And despite that, he still comes off extremely self-righteous in this situation, even though he's using this situation for purely game reasons. And again, all this is just super funny. Like, again, I personally love this downfall for Zach, to where I really couldn't have wished for it to happen any other way, especially with the scene of him trying to convince Ty to leave as well, and that's hilarious. Again, like, all this great downfall for Zach, to where, well, yeah, it shows that he's a poor sport and he's not a likable person, which again, I 100% agree on. But again, purely from a TV standpoint, I do think he made for great TV. And finally, the person that we're going to be talking about, the latest boot, the first member of the jury somehow, is Dan. And Dan played terribly. Like, it is funny how bad Dan's is at playing. I mean, if I ever do a like top 10 worst players to make the jury for Big Brother Canada, I would assume Dan would be extremely high on that. And Dan just kind of sucked at the game, which is a shame considering coming into it, I thought he had potential. Like, to me, like in his interviews preseason, he seemed to be one of the more rational thinkers of the recruits, to where I did feel like he could have had some potential here, but it really goes for naught. I mean, right away he's on the block week 1, and while he isn't going home there, like, he's obviously in a precarious spot. Week 2 he wins HOH in a position where he was going to be the target coming into that week. Literally almost the entire house had planned for Dan to be the target, and from the win HOH there obviously shakes that up, but even then he's manipulated by Zach into taking out Roberto in a situation where Rob wanted to work with him, all while trusting Zach and Ty in a situation where Ty wanted to get rid of him the next round and continued to fight to get rid of Dan. Now he does technically get through week 3 unscathed, though still loses one of his closest allies in Zach during that week, and he eventually gets booed in the following round where he's taken out by Santina for like no real benefit for Santina's game, which I mean we'll talk about when we get to Santina. But like for me, I just feel like Dan, like there's nothing there for his game. Like he's on the bottom the entire time, making incorrect moves, is constantly being targeted. I mean, there's literally never a week where coming into it, there's not a decent amount of people that would come after him, with him being the target for most of the house for weeks 2 and 4, and even week 3, and there were still people that were going to come after him. So yeah, I do think Dan played a pretty bad game, and I don't think he was the most riveting TV either. I mean, he was pretty bland on the show, despite the fact that he actually got a decent amount of DRs comparatively. But I do feel like he was a bit of a dud on this season, which I do think is a shame considering I do think he had potential early on. Well, that is every player booed so far. With that, let's start talking about the 10 players left in the game, ranking them based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Now, I will say I am recording this immediately after the digital daily that came out on Friday afternoon was released, to where I do know the HOH, I do know the target, and those will be spoiled in this video. However, really, most of this video is more so a ranking based around long-term positioning than it is on the upcoming events of the week. So with that, let's start off at number 10. The person in the worst spot to win the game in my mind is Santina, who was obviously just HOH. Now, as of right now, it does look like Santina is going to be the target. Ty did win HOH and plans on targeting Santina as payback for the previous week, which, again, I do kind of doubt Santina would be able to get her way out of. Again, like, realistically, Ty should not be targeting Santina. I do think there's other probably better targets for him, but again, she is going to be in danger here, probably being the most likely person to even go home this week. Though again, there are still outs for her, and really that is the biggest boon to Santina, is that she is pretty decent at competitions. To where I could definitely see a world where, despite the fact that she's coming into this week as the biggest target for the majority of the house, she can survive this round and possibly a few more. However, I do feel like Santina is just going to very much struggle at getting to the end. No one really trusts Santina. No one really wants to work with Santina. The only people that do are Jonathan and Hope, being the only two that really want to keep her around, while everyone else is pretty much directly targeting her this week. And again, she could win the safety, and again, there are definitely many outs to this week, but really I have no faith in Santina to actually do anything well strategically in the game. I mean, Santina has just been a complete mess from an actual game standpoint. I mean, we're looking at week 1, again, she's completely manipulated by Zach into taking out JM, only for them to later regret it, but not be able to reverse that decision, and then proceeds to openly target Zach, to where Zach then wants to target her, while also losing one of her closer allies in Rob, and putting it correctly during that round, and further isolating herself there. She was the initial target for week 3, and had the veto not been used, she would have gone home there. And then she just happened to win HOH again during the invisible HOH and do absolutely nothing with it, putting up two people that would have potentially been willing to work with her down the road. I mean, Ty was one of her biggest supporters during week 3, talking about flipping the vote to try to keep her around. Yet she decides to put him up instead. Where again, she does nothing to fully establish any relationships with this. While she does tell Jonathan about her being HOH, she is then left out of Jonathan's later alliance, where we do see this Crown alliance form, what seems to be the true core power structure of the house at this point, but she's just completely left out of that despite having Jonathan and Hope in it, two of her biggest proponents in the entire house. She really just completely wastes this opportunity to build a power structure around her, especially after the fallout from the Zach vote. Really, to me, I feel like Santina has done almost nothing right across her entire run outside of just winning specific competitions. feel like Santina really has nothing in this game to where, while yes, she could still potentially make it a few rounds longer, I just do not see the path to the end for her unless she just completely wins out, which I don't see as particularly likely from this point. Now, I will say if she got to the end somehow, I do think she could win. It's definitely not out of the realm possibility. But also, it's not really a guarantee. I guess by that point, she would be this big underdog figure and maybe people would root for her. However, no one really likes her in the house. Like, there are not that many people that actually get along with her and respect her, to where even that I feel like is a somewhat tough road. So again, I really just do not see Santina winning this game because for me, she's here at number 10. Now, number 9, kind of same thing. And to be honest, there was very much a debate between this person and Santina. However, I feel like Santina is probably in a bit more immediate danger. So here at number 9, I do have Renee. And Renee is such an interesting figure to me, where she is someone that seems to have potential. She seems to get the game. She seems to understand what she should be doing, but just can't actually execute on any of it. And instead, I seem to turn people that she's actually loyal to against her, which, to be fair, their logic makes no sense. I mean, this entire last week, everyone thought Renee was the HOH for a good chunk of it, which doesn't make sense. Why would Renee target Dan and Ty, these people closely aligned to her own allies, which Dan talks about it as if it makes sense when in reality it doesn't. Like, why is she getting rid of these people that will probably end up keeping her safe? But when she learns that people are suspecting her, she goes on this really big downward spiral that seems to blow up her game. And despite the fact that now people obviously know that it's Santina instead of Renee, it still seems like the animosity for her is still there. The likes of Claudia wants Renee out now, which is just ridiculous. Like, it makes no sense for that to be the move that you want to make here. And while it is bad on Claudia, it is also extremely bad on Renee. The fact that Renee is, again, just on the bottom here, being tied to Santina for some reason, despite the fact that we've rarely seen them have a conversation. And we've also seen them argue more recently than actually be pleasant to each other. So it makes no sense that this is the way the house is perceiving things. But it does put Renee in a similar spot to Santina, and with less win equity in competitions. That is obviously a danger there, though I think at the same time, again, that's probably a boon for her in the fact that she probably will survive over Santina. But while she isn't going to be the initial target, I do feel like there's potential for her to be a potential backup target, or even someone that might just be taken out by accident, where if Santina ends up being safe, I could see Ty going for the likes of a Hope and a Jonathan with Renee on the block, to where Renee would probably just go home by accident there. And I do feel like that could very likely happen, to where Renee is definitely in danger for this following week. Renee is someone that, again, like, if the current power structure stays hold, I don't see her making it that much further. I think she is probably going to be boot relatively soon. And even if she were to squeeze her way to the end, I don't know if she can win. Now, it's kind of a mixed bag at the end of the day, where I do think some of the reason why people perceive her the way she is because they do look at her as a good player. They do look at her as this super fan that knows the game, and through that they can garner respect by the time she gets to the end. But at the same time, just people seem to be annoyed with her, and I can see that not playing to her favor. And really, I just don't know if there's a path for Renee in the game, to where, actually, truth be told, I do think it's probably more likely that Santina wins out her way to the end than Renee sneaking her way to the end in a winning position. But I do think it's, again, more likely that Renee will survive at least a round or two, to where by then maybe the power structure will flip and she could be back into a decent-ish position. But again, I just feel like no one's going to take Renee to the end, and I don't know how likely she is going to win the game, which is a shame considering, again, I do think there's some good game ability there. Out of all the girly pops, like, she's the only one that seemed to recognize how good of a position that they were in during the Zach HOH week, talking about how they should have been playing the middle and going back and forth. And I do feel like that shows some game awareness from her that we don't really see from Shanaya and Claudia. But she's also just a really expendable person in the house. And again, some of that might tie back to week 1 where she's on the block, and that's obviously a bad position to play from. But she's never really been able to get her footing on this season. And because of that, for me, she's here number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to a player that I wish I could put lower, but I do think the chances of this person comping out at a certain point are higher than the last two, and that person is Ty. Ty is someone that just, as a player, just kind of annoys me. Again, he's alongside Zach, but at least from Zach, I kind of got some fun from it, where it was like humorous to me, the fact that people actually believed Zach, and then his downfall was pretty glorious. Well, with Ty, I just feel like Ty just comes off really unlikable to me. He just seems so bad socially, to where the way he interacts with people is just so demeaning, and the way he treats Claudia early on, despite the fact that of like not really giving her anything, despite the fact that she wants to work with him, is pretty bad there. He also comes off extremely cocky. He was walking around the house as if he was running the place and would just openly tell people that he knew the plans and he knew what was going on without actually telling them what was going on. And like I just feel like Ty is a really bad player on that front. I mean, like strategically, again, he's alongside Zach. He also is turning against his allies. Particularly Rob. Rob was someone that was extremely loyal to Ty. Rob looked at Ty as one of his core numbers. Yet Ty decides to take out Rob in week 2. And while like I personally don't like Ty, I mean, the thing is, it does seem like people in there kind of do, which is the reason why he's at number 8 here. Despite the fact that he's kind of blown up his game and he almost quit the game, he seems to still be in a not unwinnable position. Now, I do think it's going to be tough. I do think gaining the respect from the jury back after threatening to quit is rough. And then also, again, just being as bad socially as he is. But despite how bad he is socially, he still has people in his corner. I mean, early on, I had him number 1 in my power ranking, just due to the fact that he had a decent amount of numbers around him. Again, he had the likes of Rob and Jonathan and Hope working alongside him. He obviously had his alliance with Zach. He had Koozie and Claudia as really solid numbers. He built this relationship with Anika. Like, he did have a lot of power early on, and while that's faded away, he still has the remnants of that now. I mean, he obviously still has Claudia in the game. He made this deal with the Shady Bunch, with Koozie, Daniel, and Anika, to where while they are siding with Jonathan and Hope over Ty and Claudia, I do think they'll want to keep Ty around for at least a little bit to keep them safe in the game. Now, Ty is the HOH, and despite him being safe for this week, I still don't feel great about him long term. He still has people directly coming for him, particularly Hope and Jonathan. He is still essentially just a shield for the Koozie side of things, where I think if they had to, they would let him go. He's just really a backup for them. Again, like, he is going after Santina this week, which I do think he's completely laser focused on, which I do think is kind of a fault in his game. I don't think it's the best move for him. I do think he should be trying to get out the likes of a Jonathan or a Hope, which I don't even know if he can get one of them out unless they're on the block together, but I think that should be his plan here over Santina. So I think all that is pretty bad, as he's really just playing the game in a way that's going to make him a shield while also giving the Shady Bunch more power in the game. But again, I do think there's a path for him to survive the next few rounds, with the Shady Bunch wanting to keep him around, to where if he makes it to Final 7, Final 8, somewhere around there, like, there's not a 0% chance of him completely winning out. Now, I don't think he actually will. I do think there's enough decent competitors left in the game, while also the fact that Ty doesn't seem to be the most consistent competitor, to where I don't really see it happening, but there's at least a path there. But again, even if he gets to the end, I don't know if he's going to win. So again, it's a lot of mixed signals for me, but I did end up landing him here at number 8. Now, number 7, we're moving on to the first player that's in this core majority group. However, is the player that I just think is the least likely to win game by a lot here, and that person is Hope. And I really want to put Hope higher. I mean, I did very much consider just putting that majority alliance all as the top 5. However, the reason I'm putting Hope lower is because, again, I just don't know if Hope has the win equity. Now, if he were able to like hump his way to the end and potentially be this like somewhat underdog figure, I do feel like he would get respect there. Though I think as of right now, no one really looks at Hope as that good of a player. I think they all trust him and think he's this honest guy, and like he is, but I don't think that really garners any game respect. I just feel like while he isn't that unlikely to be at the very end, I do feel like just his overall win equity is near 0. Now, despite that, again, he is in the crown. He is in the majority alliance right now. However, he's also in danger this week. I mean, with Ty as HOH, if the Santina plan doesn't go through, I mean, there's a serious chance that Hope ends up being on the block as the target. Now, again, can he actually get Hope out? That's more of the question, but I think Hope is definitely in a level of danger this week, along with the fact of having, again, like really lessened win equity in my eyes. And I think it's really just demonstrated the fact that he's not really there to truly play the game. Like, he just wants to win competitions, wants to be loyal to the people he's working with. And to be fair to likes of Koozie, Daniel, and Anika, despite the fact that they are making contingency plans, they are loyal to Hope and John. They do legitimately want to go to the end with them, which I think is a really good sign for Hope. But again, it's just due to his lessened win equity, and also the amount of danger that he could potentially be in this week. And also just my lack of faith and hope as a player. He does end up landing here number 7. Now number 6, moving on to a player that I also don't feel great about. And to be honest, this person's definitely in a rockier position than Hope. Long term, however, again, is probably safe this week. And then beyond that, I think could have an underdog run. I think could garner respect by the end, even though right now it's looking rocky. And that person is Shanaya. And Shanaya, as of right now, again, I think is a very unlikely winner. I think if she were to get to the end right now, I don't think most of the jury would vote for her. However, I do think there is this like JC Lynn trajectory potentially for her, of her being able to outlast a lot of these bigger threats that are left in the game. Again, no one's really going for Shanaya right now. Again, the bigger targets are like Santina, a Ty, a Renee, even Claudia is probably looked at as a bigger target than Shanaya. And like the big worry here is does Shanaya have the comp ability that I think is really integral to this game, where I do think Shanaya would need to win some endgame comps to garner this respect. But I do think, like JC Lynn, if she does so, I think she could win over a jury. I mean, from what we learned about BB Can 10, JC was the biggest jury threat after that triple eviction, with people respecting her comp wins. I do feel like Shanaya could be in that similar spot, where she's like kind of left in the aftermath of all these bigger threats and potentially wins her way to the end. Now, do I think it's actually happening? Not really. However, again, she is very safe in the game. I don't think anyone's really coming for her. Like, I very much expect her to make it towards the end game of this season, though again, it's just in terms of the win equity, is it there? I think it's not fully, but again, at least she seems to not be as bad strategically right now as Claudia, or at least she recognizes that they shouldn't go for Renee, unlike Claudia. But again, I do feel like Shanaya is probably one of the ones that I'm the most unsure about her overall game position, which is what leaves her here at number 6. At number 5, moving on to a player that, again, I don't look at this player too highly as a player. However, position-wise, there's still some chance of her winning, and that person is Claudia. And again, for me, Claudia and Shanaya are relatively close. I think Shanaya is probably safer in the game. However, I think Claudia has more connections in the game and probably has more ability to win the game. Like, I think if Claudia got to the end at this point, I do think she would have a decent amount of votes. I do think she has built a very strong relationship with the likes of a Jonathan, and obviously a Ty, but also a Koozie seems to want to work with her. She did do very good work at the back half of last week in building up these relationships to get people to want to keep her, even though she was going to stay anyway. But I do think she really bolstered her position in the house, where again, she is now working with Koozie, Daniel, and Anika. And while again, they are siding with Jonathan and Hope over Ty and Claudia, I think Claudia will still be safe for a relatively long time now. However, that's her recovering from her really dropping the ball previously, where for me, Claudia is a player that coming out of the Zach back door, she should have been by far the best position player in the game, and she really just squanders that opportunity. She should have been in this position where she should have been able to play both sides very well, but then just decides not to and just attach herself to Ty and Dan, to where by the time of the following week, the girls' alliance essentially crumbles. And now we're in this position where, despite her recovering her positioning a bit, she's still targeting Renee for no reason, when Renee is one of the people that is the most loyal to her. And really, I just have no actual faith in her overall game ability. I just don't feel like she has an accurate read of the house, though again, like Shanaya, I do think there is this JC Lynn upside of once Ty eventually gets taken out, I do think Claudia could build up this underdog reputation. And if she were to get her way to the end with the likes of Koozie and a Daniel and a Jonathan coming after each other at the end game, and her just sneaking her way through in a position where, again, I do think she is probably the most likely person to be taken to 6 if the core power structure stays together, I do feel like Claudia is actually in a somewhat decent spot there, to where again, it's essentially Shanaya's spot, but with more potential to make it towards the end, though again, a little bit less short-term safety, but still like really safe. And while I have less faith in Claudia strategically, I still feel like her overall positioning, especially for a win, is slightly higher, and that's why she's here number 5. Now number 4, and again, the top 4 here are essentially the 4 people that I think are the most likely to win from the core majority alliance, the crown. But at number 4 here, we're starting off with the person that I think is the less well positioned of the bunch, and that person is Jonathan. Now, Jonathan is someone that I think if Jonathan gets to the end, I think he almost guaranteed wins. I think Jonathan's the type of player that people will really respect at the end, someone that is really just a kind affable person, but also one that seems to be playing the game. He is always involved in strategy talks, and while he is not very subtle when he's talking strategy, I do feel like he is still someone that will garner respect if he got to the end. I do feel like he's the type of person that could also win a lot of endgame comps to get his way to the end. Now, at the end of the day, again, I do think he is not as well positioned as the top three. And the top three do all end up being from the Shady Bunch, all of which being pretty perfectly positioned for the short term, where Jonathan, again, I think can be targeted by the likes of a tie, even though I don't think he would go home if he was targeted this week. And even beyond that, I think Jonathan is still being used as kind of a shield by the Shady Bunch, to where he is this guy out in front that will probably be targeted before any of the Shady Bunch. However, again, like, I think if Jonathan squeezes his way to the end, I do think he is probably one of the most likely winners on the board. I mean, really, I think out of this entire cast, I think there's only one person that I look at as a bigger jury threat than Jonathan at this point. And considering the fact that the initial plan right now is for him to still make it to the top 5 alongside Daniel, Koozie, Anika, and Hope, with him having Hope as a solid number 2 and also Hope being very good at competitions too, it's like this is a very solid spot for Jonathan to eventually sneak his way to the end and win. However, again, his road there is definitely a lot more precarious than the others, and realistically, do I see this alliance actually sticking to 5? Probably not. I think they'll probably turn against each other at some point down the road, or Jonathan will probably be the initial victim of that. But again, I still think the path is there, and I think he's in a solid position if the power structure stays together. So because that, he is here at number 4. Now number 3, and again, the top 3 are the Shady Bunch here. The question's the order. At number 3, the least likely to win in my eyes is Anika. Now, despite Anika being number 3 here, she's actually not that far off. I do think Anika is surprisingly turning out to be a solid player. I mean, she was someone that came into this game with no game knowledge and explicitly said that she was just going to wing it, to which that just sounded idiotic, though she's actually turning out to actually live up to that. She is seemingly learning the game as she goes along, seemingly having good instincts, and while obviously her lack of game knowledge is still a massive knock for her, I feel like she's playing pretty much as well as I could have wanted her to. Again, she found herself in a really strong alliance with Koozie and Daniel, and they're essentially running the entire game. They're in the center of everything. They have this alliance with Hope and Jonathan. They have an alliance with Ty and Claudia. They also have really nobody targeting them. And even if they are, they're going to target someone like a Koozie instead of her. And I feel like Anika is in this very good spot to where she's pretty much locked for endgame. However, again, the big worry of Anika is, can she win? And that is something I'm just unsure about. Now, her final 2 right now, and this seems to be her actual plan, is to go to the end with Daniel, which I do think is a pretty solid spot for her, as I feel like both of them are going to struggle with overall jury perception, though at the same time, I feel like Daniel's a lot more aware of that. He is, as a bigger fan of the game, while Anika isn't. And I feel like that could be the main thing that holds Anika back, is this overall lack of game knowledge, which might lead to her not knowing how to manage the jury. But outside that, I think she has played pretty well. Again, if you told me Anika would be part of the core power structure and be one of the safest people within it at the beginning of the season, I thought you'd be insane. Again, I always thought Anika would have been one of the first few boots. And while I did feel like week 1 was a very precarious spot for her, she's recovered extremely well. And I feel like she is a very solid player, but one that, again, I do feel like her overall win equity is less than that of Daniel and Koozie, though to be honest, again, I think there is a world where she could build up a better reputation than Daniel. But again, for me, I do feel like that lack of game knowledge is what leaves her here at number 3. Now number 2, and obviously the top 2 here are very obvious. I do think there's one player that is a lot safer in the game, but with less win equity, while the other one's probably in a bit more danger long term, but with a lot of win equity. However, at number 1, I decided to go with the person with the safer path, so at number 2, I do have Koozie. And straight up, Koozie is probably the most likely winner of this season, in the sense that I think Koozie beats everybody if she gets to the end. I see no way that Koozie gets to the end and does not win, even though like Dan is talking about how he thinks that Koozie is going to win and how good of a player she is. Like, I do feel like Koozie has this game on lock if she gets there. And while she is very safe for the short term, again, she is part of the Shady Bunch, to where they're essentially in the middle of everything and no one is targeting her in the short term, I do feel like long term, I just don't know if it's going to work out. Now again, I think there is a path for Koozie to get far enough to where she could win out in those last few comps, but from a pure positioning standpoint, I do feel like people are going to catch on. I mean, I think it's so apparent that Koozie is the biggest threat in the game, where Daniel and Anika openly talked about that and talked about taking her out before the end, which it is the fact that Koozie's own closest allies are already looking at targeting her at some point down the road. I think to me just screams out to me that Koozie is this well-known big threat that I do think is going to struggle to actually get to the very end. However, again, she is very well positioned short term, and I do think there's a debate for her being the best player on the board. Now, I will say I still disagree with the Zach decision, to where I think her backdooring Zach is a pretty bad move that just so happened to work out for her. Where I think her initial plan should have been to take out Santina or Dan, and she seemed to be going through with that at first. But with her backdooring Zach, really all it does is again get rid of a shield in Zach for her, while also turns the likes of Ty against her. And while again she's been able to recover that since, I do feel like she didn't need to do that to begin with. While also again the entire move obviously puts this massive target on her back, where now I think long term people are going to continuously be thinking about Koozie as the person that got Zach out, and through that talk about how likely she is going to win the game. And I do feel like her move to take out Zach was just one that was very unnecessary in my eyes. One that just felt like her upping her profile way too early in the game. But again, the way that she's been maneuvering through the game since then has been very impressive. Again, she's been able to essentially fix her own mistakes and get herself back into this solid position in the middle. But again, I do feel like the fact that Daniel and Anika are already talking about taking her out down the road is just such a bad sign for her long-term prospects. Where I just don't know if anyone's actually going to take Koozie to the end. I think everyone looks at Koozie as this really big threat where she's going to have to take herself to the end. And while it's not out of the realm of possibility, I do feel like the fact that her entire game essentially relies on that at this point is definitely a bit of a worry. But again, she seems to have a good understanding of the game. She seems to know exactly how to position herself in the game. Where again, the work the Shady Bunch did to earn back the trust of Ty and Claudia while also building up the trust with Jonathan and Hope and putting themselves in the middle is all very impressive work. Though again, I just feel like Koozie's path to the tail end is a bit rockier than the next person we'll be talking about. So because of that, for me, Koozie's here number 2. Now number 1, the player I think is the most likely to win the game at this point is Daniel. And Daniel's a bit of a tough one, as I do feel like there are rocky points in Daniel's game, especially in terms of his relationship with Zach. The fact that he continued to try to keep Zach the entire time, even going against his own alliance and doing so, just felt kind of ridiculous. I do feel like that was very poor play there. However, everything else about his game is very, very strong. Again, right now, I do think he is the best position in the house. Again, he is in the Shady Bunch, but is also in the final 2 within the Shady Bunch with, again, me assuming that Daniel would beat Anika if they got to the final 2, especially considering Daniel's knowledge of the game to where I think he can manage the jury well enough to where he would beat Anika at the end. Where again, they've also talked about taking out Koozie down the road, to which again, Koozie is somewhat aware of this, though that doesn't change the fact that Daniel and Anika are going to want to eventually take her out, and I think most of the house will want to take out Koozie, where especially if we're towards the end of the game, I think Daniel could be the one to lead the charge on that move and get the credit for it. But even beyond just his positioning as the Shady Bunch, being in the middle house there, he also has very good social relationships with people outside of the Shady Bunch. I mean, he has very good relations with the Girly Pops, where that was what put him in a very good position before this last week, where the Girly Pops were talking about taking him to Final 4. He's now built up this relationship with Ty through using the veto on him, and obviously has Claudia and Ty as a parachute alliance there, also has Jonathan and Hope, and with Santina being the most likely person to go this week. Once Santina goes, he essentially has everyone in the house in his corner. There is no one in the house at that point that he doesn't have a very strong relationship with that wants to take him towards the end game. Where again, literally running through the house. He has Koozie and Anika as a final 3. Jonathan and Hope have a final 5 deal with him. Claudia and Ty have a final 5 deal with him. The Girly Pops one at 4. That's literally the entire house. I just really see no path for Daniel to not get towards the end of the game at this point, and with him already setting up this eventual move to take out Koozie, who is the biggest threat in the game at this point in terms of win equity, I do feel like Daniel's in a very, very solid position to go on to win the game. Now again, all this is relying on him executing on this, where again, I think in his current position, he's not in this position to win the game. Again, that is why I think Koozie can be debated as the number 1, as Koozie, I think at this point, does win the game if she gets the end. Well, Daniel, I do think he loses to probably the likes of Koozie and a Jonathan, and I do think he really has to fight for votes against pretty much everybody else. Though again, he has a solid plan. He has all these alliances. He has this final 2 with Anika, someone that I think he is likely to be, and also has this plan to take out Koozie along the way. Like, I really feel like all the pieces are there for Daniel's game, and while it can't be guaranteed that he's going to execute on this properly, I do feel like Daniel has this perfect mix at this point of short and long-term safety, while also having good enough win equity to where there are scenarios where I think he wins, while also having a solid plan to get himself the win. And I feel like all these things piece together to him being number 1 here. But there we go. I mean, that's my mid-season power ranking for BB Can 11. Now moving forward, I will still be doing the typical review and player ranking for the season once it concludes, along with the same thing for Survivor 44, which is obviously currently airing as well. Now, if you want to follow my thoughts on the season as it progresses, you can follow me at twitch.tv/TheRenee where I stream every Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. You can check me out there. And obviously just expect more of the same type of videos on this channel moving forward. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.